Hi everyone, my name is Susan Dennis. As you guys know me, I am a fourth grade bilingual teacher for reading and writing, social studies, revising and editing, and I will be doing a little presentation on morphology. Some of you might know the term morphology. Some of you might understand it already and you just don't know the actual word morphology. So I'm going to be just kind of reviewing some key points on what morphology is. All of us here are, reading and writing teachers from pre-K all the way to fifth grade. And this is very important when we are trying to teach our students um, the concept of words and how to break down words and put words together. And so here we go. So, what is morphology? Morphology is the study of words and word formation. Words, however, are difficult to define and can be taught as the units that are combined to form sentences in language, such as English. And researchers are still trying to really define what word is. But words can be broken down into smaller, meaningful parts. And when we break them down, the smallest meaningful part of the word is called a morpheme. The example I'm going to use today is the word trees. The word trees has two morphemes, the word tree and then the S to make it plural. And then we have free morphemes, which are the root words and they can stand alone. So a free morpheme in my example is the root word tree. And then we also have bound morphemes, and they have to be attached to a free morpheme, hence the word bound. And here in this example, we have the S. So the S can't stand alone and have a meaning. So it is used to make a free morpheme plural in this case. So we attach it to the word tree to make it trees. Okay, so affixes actually comes from, is part of a bound morpheme. It refers to the prefixes and suffixes. So these are parts uh, uh, that are attached to either to the beginning or the end of the word. They're a type of morpheme. Um, and sometimes it affects the word and sometimes it uh, does not. So in some languages, there are also infixes. For example, so these infixes are actually inserted in the middle of the word rather than in the beginning and the end, like prefixes and suffixes would. However, English does not have this, so we really don't have to worry about that. Just wanted to give you a little extra information on that. So with the affixes, there's actually two categories. The first one that I'm going to talk about is called inflectional affixes. And these are added to the word, uh, but does not change the part of speech or the meaning of the root word. Um, it doesn't change the meaning, for example, from a noun to a verb or a verb to an adjective. In English, the inflectional affixes are all suffixes. So there are actually 8 inflectional affixes. In nouns, we usually put, to make it plural, we put an S at the end and an ES. And if we want to make it possessive, we would put the S with the apostrophes. In verbs, we would add the suffix ing, the suffix ed, and the suffix en, which we all know it means third person singular or the tense that it's in. Excuse me. And then in adjectives and adverbs, in comparison to other things, when we compare two things, we might, we put the ER and the EST. And the second category is the derivational affixes. These affixes do change the meaning, and it can either be prefixes or suffixes. So some examples here, for example, the word work, we know that that is a verb. Somebody will, do some kind of work. But if we add the er, the verb is now changed to a noun, and it produces the noun worker. So that's one example. Another example is the word respectful. If we add the word un in front of respectful, we get the word unrespectful. And we know that an un would be the suffix not, so it changes the meaning from being respectful to not being respectful. And then we have the word happy plus ness. So happy gives us the meaning of the mood a person might be in, the feeling. And then when we add ness, it actually becomes, when it creates the word happiness, it's now the state of being. So it does change the meaning of the word happy a bit. So prefixes, it is a little bit easier because the prefixes carry meaning. So when we add un, we know that un means not. So if we put it, for example, in respectful, unrespectful means not respectful. If we put it in front of happy, un plus happy would be unhappy, which is the opposite of happy, so not happy. And there are other prefixes like dis and re. So all of those prefixes they each have their own meaning. So when you add it in the beginning of a word, it does change the meaning of the root word. And then for the suffixes, it basically tells us a little bit more about the parts of speech than the meaning of the word. It's not changing the meaning of the word, it's just now adding more to it. Okay. So prefixes and suffixes serve somewhat different functions, and they carry different kinds of meaning. Okay, so teaching morphology. So inflectional morphology is usually taught in the elementary level. These, like I said before, the inflectional morphology is just usually adding the ed or the ing, the en, the s, the es, and we usually start teaching that, in kindergarten, first grade kindergarten, when we're trying to teach the verb tenses, and then the derivational morphology is usually taught in middle school. But however, we all know that in our district, we like to stand out a bit. So from what I've seen, we start teaching the derivational morphology in the third grade. You guys know I was in second grade last year, so even then we would teach those particular prefixes and suffixes, and we start teaching the meaning of it and introduce it. They don't technically master it in the second grade, but we know that we introduce it in second grade, and it starts building up from there. So what happens is, because we are teaching it pretty early in their developmental stage, it can lead a lot of students to not be able to master it. And with the population that we have, which is 92% Hispanic, they are going to struggle in this area. So there are many things that as teachers we need to be able to provide for them in order for them to keep spiraling back to what it's for them to try to master it. And not only just in reading and writing or in revising and editing, but we do need to carry it across content. So in math or in science, we should be encouraging our partners to really uh, take, take charge almost of how they can implement morphology into their classroom, because they actually are doing it, but they might just not know it. And they maybe if they point it out a little bit more, now it's being carried over across all content. So the next slide is just a couple of teaching methods that can be used in order to help your students. Okay, so what good morphology looks like. So these are four basic principles that we should try to implement into our teaching. The first principle is the morphology should be taught in the context of rich vocabulary instruction. So when making sure that you're applying it when you're teaching your academic vocabulary is definitely a great part or place where you can really emphasize morphology. For example, if we are talking about the word, or today we're going to celebrate this, well, let's look at, okay, well, now if we change celebrate to celebration, what does that mean now? So you're taking it from one context to the other. And they're hearing it in different ways. So making it meaningful, and making sure that it can be manipulated. So I think as far as this strategy or this principle, can definitely be carried out through all content, through math, science, reading, and writing. Even, in the hallways, or art, PE, music, I think this is definitely one that we can all participate in. The next principle is using morphology can be taught as a cognitive strategy. So it should not be a list of rules, but it should be more of a thinking strategy they can use in reading and in writing, and we know that writing is carried over into math and science. So this is definitely a strategy that can be used, again, through all content, not just reading and writing. So making sure that it's a thinking strategy and not just a set of rules that they need to follow. The next principle would be instruction should introduce important word parts systematically and with opportunities for reteaching and practice. So again, we want to make sure that it is a concept that is being spiraling back throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year. It should be something that the students are able to practice almost every day. Teachers are talking about it every day. The more they hear it, the more they practice it, the easier it will be for them to retain that information. So with this strategy, you may want to, sit down with your team or your partners or your IS and plan which elements of morphology you want to teach, and in what order. So kind of looking at your scope and sequence that possibly the district has already given you, and look through it to see what can change or maybe what you want to stay the same. And then the last one is that the instruction should be explicit but situated in meaningful context. So this means, you should not be giving your students worksheets to practice morphology. It should be more about making it meaningful and thematic. Again, having, games or something that they can manipulate and really invest themselves in their learning. That's how they're going to really be able to do a great job at understanding